This GBVIMS video short is an overview of the incident classification tool. Let's start with an activity. Take out a piece of paper and number it 1 through 5. On that piece of paper, classify each of these incidents as you would on your own, not using any tools, just how you think they should be classified. Let's read these together. A woman reports being beaten by her husband for not cleaning the house properly. A girl reports that she was only allowed to attend school after she had sex with her teacher. A boy reports that his uncle has been touching his genitals. A woman reports that her boss is threatening to fire her if she does not have sex with him. A woman reports that she was raped by a group of men when she was walking home from her sister's house. Once everyone in your group has classified these incidents, bring them to the front of the room and look at all of them. Look at how all of the incidents are classified together. Is there anything that stands out to you? I'll pause here so you can have a discussion. One thing you might notice is that not everyone classified the incidents in the same way. There might be different terminology we use. People might have classified it in an entirely different way than you did. This is an important thing to notice. We're noticing here that there's a lot of subjectivity in how we classify these incidents. Here's another example. A woman reports being raped and badly beaten to Delphine, a case manager for an NGO that provides services to GBV survivors. On the intake form, Delphine classifies this incident as rape. A week later, a different woman reports being raped and badly beaten to Rebecca, a case manager, who works for the same NGO as Delphine. Rebecca classifies the incident as physical assault. Here we see Delphine and Rebecca receiving the same information, but they're classifying it differently because they're inviting subjectivity into the process. So what do we need with any incident classification tool? We need standardization. So just what is standardization? What does it mean to you? Why is it important? Can you give any examples of standardization? It's really the process of creating consistency or regularity, right? Standardizing something means that we're consistently all doing it the same way with a uniform process. This is important because if we're not all doing it the same way, we can't really do any analysis. We can't build anything off of this if we don't have our foundation in the right place. So this is where the incident classification tool comes in. These are the principles it was built off of. The purpose of the classification tool is really two parts. The first is to standardize the types of GBV and their definitions. So I mentioned earlier terminology. This is what we're looking at, terminology. The second part is standardizing the procedure for classifying an incident of GBV. So once we have the terminology, then we need to have the same process. When we built the incident classification tool, there were really 3 criteria that we used to build the system off of. The first one, that they were universally recognized forms of gender-based violence. So from Sierra Leone to Iraq to Zimbabwe to Ecuador, we could have types of gender-based violence that were universally recognized in all of those settings. We didn't want to make it specific to just one context. Next, we wanted to focus on the specific act of violence, separate from the motivation behind it or the context in which it was perpetrated. For example, when we're looking at the specific act of violence, we want to know what actually occurred. We don't want to know that it was domestic violence, for example. Domestic violence tells us about the perpetrator or the context, but it doesn't tell us actually what happened to that person. Domestic violence can be interpreted as sexual assault as rape, verbal abuse, emotional abuse. It doesn't really tell us actually what happened, which is really important for the type of services that we provide. And finally, we wanted something that was mutually exclusive. So we wanted types of violence that didn't overlap with one another. Using the example of domestic violence again, domestic violence could overlap a lot of different types of gender-based violence. So we want things that are mutually exclusive, that we can separate between the two, that there's no ambiguity if it's rape or sexual assault, that there's a clear distinction. Before we talk about the incident types, it's important that we make a note about consent. There's no consent when an agreement is obtained by threat, force, coercion, abduction, fraud, manipulation, deception, or misrepresentation. There's no consent when there's a threat to withhold a benefit to which someone's already entitled, or a promise to provide a benefit. Many laws set an age of consent in your setting. When it comes to the GBV, this doesn't adhere to local laws, and these incident classifications are not legal definitions. There's a couple of reasons for that. One, we wanted to make a tool that was globally applicable. And two, laws in a lot of different settings aren't in favor of gender-based violence survivors. For example, in New York, marital rape wasn't against the law until 1984. So those kind of things aren't in the favor of our service. So we had two parts of standardization. The first one was that we'd standardize the types of GBV and their definitions. So let's start there. Let's talk about the incident types. The first one is rape or penetration. This is the non-consensual penetration, however slight, of the vagina, anus, or mouth with the penis or other body part. This also includes penetration of the vagina or anus with an object. Sexual assault. This is any form of non-consensual sexual contact that does not result in or include penetration. Examples include attempted rape, unwanted kissing, fondling, or touching of the genitalia and buttocks. Female genital mutilation or cutting is an act of violence that impacts sexual organs, and as such, we'll classify it as sexual assault. This incident type doesn't include rape where penetration has occurred. Next, physical assault. This is an act of physical violence that is not sexual in nature. It includes hitting, slapping, choking, cutting, shoving, burning, shooting, use of any weapons, acid attacks, or any other act that results in pain, discomfort, or injury. And again, this doesn't include here female genital mutilation or cutting. Next, forced marriage. This is the marriage of an individual against her or his will. Then we have denial of resources, opportunities, or services. This is the denial of rightful access to economic resources, assets, or livelihood opportunities, education, health, or other social services. This could include a widow prevented from receiving an inheritance, earnings forcibly taken by an intimate partner or family member, a woman prevented from using contraceptives, a girl prevented from attending school. Reports of general poverty shouldn't be recorded in this category. And finally, psychological or emotional abuse. This is the infliction of mental or emotional pain or injury. This includes threats of physical or sexual violence, intimidation, humiliation, forced isolation, stalking, harassment, unwanted attention, remarks, gestures, or written words of a sexual and/or menacing nature, or destruction of cherished things. It's important to make a note here. These GBVIMS incident types were developed in order to standardize the classification of incidents for data collection and analysis purposes. Regardless of the incident type, the survivor should be able to access any services she needs. And this also doesn't mean this is the type of terminology you have to use with the client. You can use the terminology for the incident that she's comfortable with. This is just for the purpose of data collection and analysis. So let's go back again. We have two things that we need to make sure this is standardized. The first one was types and terminology. We have that. We've just gone through our 6 types. The next one was about the process or the procedures. So now that we have our types, how do we assign a type? Our system goes through a process of elimination. There are a series of questions you should ask yourself as a service provider when you hear about an incident. These questions we're about to go through are never questions that you should ask the survivor. You should ask this based off what the survivor has told you. So the first question you'd ask yourself is, did the reported incident involve penetration? If you say yes, then you stop and classify that incident as rape. No need to go through the rest of the questions. If not, you go on to the next question. And you ask yourself, did the reported incident involve unwanted sexual contact? If you can answer yes, then you stop and classify that incident as sexual assault, and you don't move on to the next question. If you answered no, you move on to the next question. Did the reported incident involve physical assault? If you answered yes, then you stop and classify that incident as physical assault, and you don't continue with the questions. If not, you move on to the next question. Was the incident an act of forced marriage? If you answered yes, you stop and classify the incident as forced marriage. If not, you proceed on to the next question. Did the reported incident involve the denial of resources, opportunities, or services? If you answer yes, you stop and classify the incident as denial of resources, opportunities, or services. If not, you proceed on to the next question. Did the incident involve psychological or emotional abuse? If you answer yes, then you stop and classify the incident as psychological or emotional abuse. If not, then you proceed on to the next question, and you ask yourself, did the incident involve GBV? If yes, start over at the top again and try to classify the incident again. If not, then it's not considered an act of gender-based violence. So let's try this out together. Using the terminology that we just went through and this process, these 6 questions, let's go through the next example instance together. A young girl reports that her neighbor inappropriately touched her breasts. So thinking about that question, let's go back to our previous slide. Did that incident involve penetration? No. Did the incident involve unwanted sexual contact? Yes. So we'd stop and classify that first one as sexual assault. Let's move on to the next one. An old woman reports being beaten at home by her husband. Let's go back to the questions. Did this incident involve penetration? No. Did the incident involve unwanted sexual contact? No. Did the incident involve physical assault? Yes. So we'll stop and classify that incident as physical assault. Let's move on to the next question. A woman reports that she came home from her work and her boyfriend took the money she had earned. Let's go back to our questions. Did the incident involve penetration? No. Did the incident involve unwanted sexual contact? No. Did the incident involve physical assault? No. Was the incident an act of forced marriage? No. Did the incident involve denial of resources, opportunities, or services? Since her boyfriend took the money she had earned, we can stop and classify this incident as denial of resources, opportunities, or services. Let's go on to the next one. A girl was forced by her mother to have sex with peacekeepers to earn money for her family. Now to the questions. Did the incident involve penetration? So we know that the girl was forced to have sex with the peacekeepers. So we can say yes. We'll stop and classify this incident as rape. And finally, a woman reports that her husband forced her to have sexual intercourse with him before he would give her money to feed the family's children. Did the incident involve penetration? Yes. So we can stop and classify this incident as rape. I hope going through these examples gives you a better idea of how we always need to go back to the questions. Let's go through a couple of more. A girl reports that the night before she was supposed to be married against her will, she ran away. She would like your help to prevent the marriage from taking place. So let's go back to our questions. Did the incident involve penetration? No. Did the incident involve sexual assault, unwanted sexual contact? No. Did the incident involve physical assault? No. Did the incident involve forced marriage? No. Some of you might have answered yes to that last question. Let's read this sentence again. A girl reports that the night before she was supposed to be married, against her will, she ran away. So the girl is reporting this before the marriage occurred. It hasn't happened yet. If we go back to our criteria at the very beginning, we talked about focusing on the specific act of violence that occurred. So since the marriage didn't occur, we can't classify this as forced marriage. We continue with our question. Did the incident involve denial of resources, opportunities, or services? No. Did the incident involve psychological or emotional abuse? Yes, absolutely. Going through the prospect of being forced to marry is absolutely psychological emotional abuse. So we'd stop and classify this incident as psychological emotional abuse. Let's try another one. A woman reports to you that she was forced to marry her late husband's brother the day after he died, and since has been locked in a room alone until she escaped this morning. So did this incident involve penetration? No. Did it involve unwanted sexual contact? No. Did it involve a physical assault? No. Was it an act of forced marriage? Yes. She reports here that the marriage went through. The marriage was completed. So we can classify this one as forced marriage. Now, these are all one sentence or two sentence scenarios. This is just for the purpose of this example. In real life, when you're speaking with clients, you're going to have a lot more information and you're going to have a fuller context of what actually happened to them. So why don't we go through the next examples on your own? Take out another piece of paper, number it 1 through 5, and go through the questions on your own. How would you classify each of these? Then, as a group, come together and see if everybody classified it the same way or if there are still points of confusion. We'll read through these together, and then you can pause the video. A woman reports being beaten by her husband for not cleaning the house properly. Number 2, a girl reports that she could only attend school after having sex with her teacher. Number 3, a boy reports that his uncle has been touching his genitals. Number 4, a woman reports that her boss is threatening to fire her if she does not have sex with him. And finally, a woman reports being raped by a group of men when she was walking home from her sister's house. Now you can pause the video and go through these questions together. Welcome back. Let's go through these together to see if everyone got the right answer. How did you classify incident 1? If you said physical assault, you're right. The woman reports being beaten by her husband for not cleaning the house properly. If we go through the questions in order, we can classify this one as physical assault. Number 2, how did you answer this one? So we're assuming by the way the sentence is written that the sex actually occurred. So going through our questions together, we would classify this one as rape. Number 3, how did you classify this one? If you said sexual assault, you're right. It's not clear from this sentence that there was penetration, but there was unwanted sexual contact. So we'll classify this one as sexual assault. Number 4, how did you classify this one? The correct answer is psychological or emotional abuse. We're seeing here that a woman reports that her boss is threatening to fire her if she doesn't have sex with him. So we can see from the sentence that the sex hasn't occurred and that she hasn't been fired. If the sex has occurred, we would have classified it as rape. Here, her boss is threatening her, and we could go through the questions together. I know after going through those that a threat falls under psychological or emotional abuse. And finally, a woman reports being raped by a group of men when she was walking home from her sister's house. If we go through the questions together, we can classify this one as rape. Penetration occurred. This one is classified as rape. Let's go through some common questions. So first, if you have multiple survivors, let's say that some women come in and say that they were attacked on their way to the market. Each woman, even if they experience the same incident, should have their own intake form because each of them should receive their own service. And if you remember when we were going over the intake form, one intake form equals one incident for each survivor, and each one should have their own service, customized to each individual. But it can get tricky sometimes. Let's say there are multiple incidents over a period of time. This is where you have to use a bit of your own judgment. Each incident requires an intake form to be filled out because you're providing a unique service based on that incident. Let's say that a woman was verbally abused by her husband every day for 10 years. We're not going to fill out thousands of intake forms for that. What we're going to do in that scenario, since it's the same perpetrator and the same type of violence, we're going to fill out one intake form. And I'm going to mark on that intake form that she's had previous experiences of GBV as well. If, for example, someone comes in and says, I was raped at the market by a stranger. When I came home and told my husband, he beat me, we can see here that those are two distinct incidents. They have two separate perpetrators. They're two different types of violence. So in that case, we'd fill out two different intake forms and classify those incidents separately. But it's important to use your judgment here. Are you providing separate services for those types of violence? Are they reporting them at different time periods with different perpetrators? Those are the questions you need to ask yourself. It also comes up sometimes that there's non-gendered violence that's reported. For example, child abuse that's not gender-based, or domestic arguments that are not reflective of gender inequities. For example, couples arguing about children that have behavior problems. So it's important to ask yourself if this is actually gender-based violence as well. A couple of other common questions. Abandonment or denial of paternity. This is normally classified as denial of resources, opportunities, or services, or psychological emotional abuse. If the woman was financially dependent on the father before pregnancy, this could be denial of resources. If she was not financially dependent, it would be psychological or emotional abuse. And for female genital mutilation or cutting, this is a reminder. We went over this earlier. But because this act of violence impacts sexual organs, this should be classified as sexual assault and not physical assault. Now it's time to practice more. In your group, here's a great exercise you can do. Everyone write down an incident on a Post-it note. Just 1 or 2 sentence incident. When you're done, hand it to a facilitator. Then the facilitator can move the Post-it notes around the room so everybody gets a new Post-it note written by someone else. Once you have your new Post-it note written by someone else, go through the questions and classify that incident. Then as a group, talk about how each of those incidents was classified. Ask yourself if this classification is correct. And in some cases, if you need a little bit more information than the one sentence that was provided. This is a really helpful way to talk about types of violence that you commonly hear in your setting and that might be a little bit more difficult to classify. At this point, you might want to pause the video to go through these together. All right, now that you're back, I'd like to go through a few more things that the database can help us with. You might be thinking, intimate partner violence isn't one of the types of violence, but I really want to capture that. This is really important in my setting for our analysis. There's a lot that the database automatically does for you once you enter the information from the intake form and the classification tool. For example, in the database, if you enter any one of the type 6 types of violence, and you say that the perpetrator relationship is an intimate partner, then the database will automatically generate that this is an act of intimate partner violence. This means that although we only have our 6 types, we actually have additional, more contextualized information about that individual that we can aggregate with other individuals and use for analysis. Another example, in the database, if you say that the incident is rape or sexual assault and that the survivor was a child at the time of incident, the database will automatically generate that this is child sexual abuse. If your type of violence is forced marriage and the survivor at the time of incident was a child, the database will automatically generate that this is an act of early marriage. Do you remember the question on the intake form that talked about if money, goods, benefits, or services were exchanged in relation to the incident? If you marked yes for that, and you also said that the incident was rape or sexual assault, the database will automatically generate that this was possible sexual exploitation. If on the intake form you mark that there was any type of abduction, whether it's forced conscription, trafficking, or other types of abduction or kidnapping, and you also mark that this was an incident of rape or sexual assault, the database will automatically generate for you that this is a case of possible sexual slavery. That's all we have for this video short. Thank you so much for watching. As always, be responsible with your data and visit gbvims.com for more information.